Hello, I'm Robin Hayden, and I'm recording this in March of 2021. Normally, around this time of year, we'd be getting ready to meet in person at the Bringing Back the Natives garden tour, but given the year we're having, we'll instead record this garden tour digitally. I'm going to take you on a tour of our home garden at 2500 San Jose Avenue in Alameda. I'm going to take you through our front, back, and side gardens, but don't worry, it won't take long because our property is really small. Like a lot of houses in Alameda, we have a tiny front yard and a tiny backyard. So our garden is actually a good one to take a look at if you're thinking about planning for small spaces. As I take you through our front and back gardens, these are some of the things I'm going to be talking about. And one thing I want to mention right up front is the importance of making a garden that you're planning your own. To find some special feature or some special something that is uniquely yours and will make your garden special for you. For me, that was mosaics. I make mosaics. Mostly the mosaics that I make are for indoors, but I decided when we were planning our garden that I would create a few outdoor mosaics to nestle in amongst the plants. So as you're looking through these pictures, I'll point them out where I can. So let's start with the front garden. This is what our house looked like when we bought it in 2012. As you can see, it had a fairly traditional lawn and trees and a big cement sidewalk up to the front door. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted, but I knew I didn't want a lawn in a drought state of California, and I didn't like the cement walkway much. And it was around that time that I went to my first Bringing Back the Natives garden tour and was introduced to the importance of planting native plants and all the benefits that that brings. I also sat in on a sheet mulching workshop and learned all about that. So that gave me a lot of ideas for what I wanted to do next. So the first thing we did was remove the trees and the grass. We wanted to remove that cement walkway, and we decided to sheet mulch. And for those of you who have done this or participated in the workshop, these pictures will look familiar. So we did this in the winter of 2013 and then just let it percolate for a couple of months until we were ready to plant. Here's what it looked like with all the mulch on top. You can see in the picture on the right, we've removed the cement walkway. Also at that native plant tour, we met the gardener Liz Simpson, who's pictured here on the right. And I liked a lot of the gardens that Liz had designed and started talking with her, and we decided to work together on our front garden. She drew up the plans that you see on the left, including an irrigation plan that you see on the tissue layer on the top. And that's her pictured with the plants that we decided upon. And here's Liz installing the hardscape. We went with Hamilton Gray Select paving stones and Napa Basalt occasional rocks with some Pammy cobbles sprinkled in between the Hamilton Gray. So here she is plotting out like giant puzzle pieces what the look of that walkway is going to be. And here are the plants in position, ready to go. In hindsight, we probably overplanted this little patch. You'll see in some of the later photos that are more current day, the garden is quite full. I think we could have gotten away with planting a little bit less, but it's hard to tell, when you're starting. But it is important to keep in mind how big the plants are going to get when you're deciding how many to put in. So here's what it looked like with everything planted and all the hardscape installed. This was right after we finished. We also have these side strips. Our house is a corner house, so we have this other gardening opportunity in the little strip between the sidewalk and the street. And so we carried through the same themes there, some of the same plants and those same Hamilton Gray slate stones. But the plants here had to be pretty hardy because it gets a lot of wear and tear. Cars park here, people open doors on plants, step on things, so we had to have things that were going to really stand up to that. So we ended up planting a lot of manzanita in this strip, which worked out really well. We have about 4 species of manzanita in the gardens. But I also made a mistake here, and I'm wondering if those of you who are more familiar with native plants recognize the mistake I made. It's that plant that you see right in the foreground, Mexican feathergrass. Here's a closer look at that. I liked this plant. I liked the look of it. It kind of looked like mermaid hair. I thought it was very pretty. But as soon as I got it in, I realized the mistake. It was an invasive species, and I didn't know that. Once I realized it, I ripped it all out. But I can tell you that was in 2014 that I put that plant in, and I am still to this day in 2021 finding little sprouts of Mexican feathergrass in my garden. So once it's in, it's hard to eradicate. So definitely one you want to avoid. And here's the house a few years later when the plants had gotten a little larger and everything had filled in. And that red arrow there is pointing out one of the mosaics. I did these as on stepping stones and planned them right into the walkway right along with the Hamilton Gray. And I see them every time I go in and out the door, and it's just kind of my little signature on the garden. Here's a side-by-side before and after view, before on the left, after on the right, to give you an idea of how it's changed. Now let's take a look at the back garden. So this one we did a few years later in 2016. You can see the back garden for the house really wasn't much of a garden. It was really more of a deck. We had this large crumbling deck that pretty much took up the whole space. And so our plan was to dismantle the deck and remove it and reclaim some of the ground underneath for planting. When we started the plan for this, Liz Simpson was no longer living in California, so we had to find a new garden designer, and Jude Hawley was our designer of choice for this, and she was wonderful to work with. She's terrific. That's her pictured on the right. And then that's Bob Otterson on the left, who is a builder, and he was going to take apart the old deck and build the new deck. I included this picture in the slideshow because it was exactly this kind of collaboration that really made a difference on our project. They had never met before, and so I asked them to meet together with me so that we could plot things out and have the gardening plan influence the deck and vice versa. And I also wanted to get the plan in place for the irrigation system because I knew it would impact both. And it turned out that collaboration early on in the planning stages was really helpful and changed a lot of the things we ended up doing. Here's the drawing that Jude did for our back garden. And here's Bob beginning to take apart the old deck, the demolition. There's the waste. There was a lot there, an amazing amount of wood and cement for such a tiny place. And it turned out that there was more than we even thought. Underneath the deck, there was a lot of cement, old cement stairs, the base of an old hot tub, and that all had to be jackhammered out and removed. This ended up taking us a lot longer than we thought it was going to. But we eventually got it all out of there, and this is what it looked like when it was clear. We also had to remove that brick that you see, which my husband and I did brick by brick. Here's the new deck going in. And here's the new deck complete. We decided to have one side of the new deck be a raised vegetable bed with a kind of sitting rail along the edges. And you can see that we lined the planter box with waterproofing membrane. And if you look in the picture on the right, you can just see a piece of irrigation hose there. And this is a good example of the collaboration between Bob, the contractor, and Jude, the garden designer. She was right there on the day that he was finishing this vegetable box so that she could wire in the right size irrigation disc, irrigation hose at the right place for the plan that she had in mind. And it's exactly that kind of cooperation that made such a difference. And there's the finished deck. That lattice work, that wooden lattice work actually removes in panels so you can get underneath the deck for storage. And Bob fashioned a little door as well, a little secret door in the side of the deck so that you have a second access point for underneath the deck. I also wanted to have a potting shelf or a potting table, but we don't have a lot of space back there. So we came up with this idea of having a foldable potting shelf, which actually works out really well. It's in its folded up state on the left and its open state on the right. And I end up using this a lot, not just for potting, but for other things too. It's extremely useful. Here we are putting in the hardscape for the back, and we use the same materials front and back to have some continuity. And here's the hardscape installed. And here are the plants. Again, for continuity's sake, we planted many of the same natives between the front and the back with a few variations back here. This was something I really wanted to try in that tiny backyard space. I wanted to get a little experiment with a little vertical garden. And so we built a frame for this vertical garden in the fence that you can see in the bottom right-hand picture. And then I purchased these plastic vertical garden pieces. There's 4 of them. Each one has 25 slots for plants. So altogether it's 100 little slots for plants. And you put a little potting soil in each pocket. Each pocket is kind of slanted so the plant stays in and doesn't fall out. And then you stuff the plant in. And we ran a irrigation hose up the side and across the top, and the water sort of percolates through from top to bottom. That's how it stays watered. I play around with this vertical garden quite a bit, actually. I take things out and try something else. Something dies, I replace it. It's tricky to get the right kind of plant in here because those little pockets are quite small, so the plants dry out pretty quickly. This is a really sunny spot too, so only certain plants will do well there. So I've played with succulents, I've tried ground cover, I've tried mosses. Mosses don't work so well, they dry out pretty quickly. You don't want anything that's going to get any height to it because you want it to keep it kind of flush to the vertical space. So I think of this as kind of a living mosaic. I just kind of play with the pieces and reorganize it. Here's what it looked like finished, all planted the first time. And there's another view of it. And here's the back garden when it was just first finished. There's the raised vegetable bed. And here's what the garden looks like today. That picture on the right is actually fairly recent. And there's one more thing I want to point out there in the picture on the right, and that is another mosaic. This one's called a pebble cast mosaic. And these are actually pretty easy to do. You just use some bender board and arrange stones in a pattern that you like, and then you cover it with cement. And so these are pictures I took while I was building that, and it makes for a nice feature in the hardscape. So that's our garden, front, back, and side, and I'll conclude with a list of the common names of the native plants that we planted. And I thank you very much for coming to see my garden today, and I hope we get a chance to meet in person one day and perhaps talk a little bit.